Tonight, I would like to share with you some thoughts, several thoughts from Ha-Turim that relate specifically to our that relate to the Haggadah and to the drama surrounding the servitude in Mitzrayim and the redemption from Mitzrayim, which of course is the whole theme of the Pesach experience and especially the Seder night. So I'd like to start with the very end of Bereshis because the experience of the exile already begins towards the end of the book of Bereshis, albeit the servitude and the slavery and the misery and the yearning for redemption did not set in until the beginning of Shmos. But let's go back to the last verses, the last psukim in Sefer Bereshis. If you've got your stone chumash, then you can find it on page 288. And here Yosef is dying, and on his deathbed, he adjures his brothers, his probably nephews as well, the next generation. Yosef, of course, is the central personality within the next generation of Bnei Yisrael, of the 12 brothers. Yosef is the fulcrum, he's the catalyst, and he's the central figure. Of course, he's the viceroy, and now he's going to die, and he's going to be placed in a sarcophagus in Mitzrayim, and he wants to be like unforgotten. He insists that his brothers will undertake to take his remains with them. That's the context. So take a look at Pasuk Chaf Hey, the last or the penultimate verse in the book of Bereshis. Vayashba Yosef his bnei Israel lemor. He adjured them, he caused them to swear. He bound them with an oath, lemor, saying, Pakod yifkod Elohim eschem ve'elisim es atzmosai mizeh. The time will come when God will indeed remember you. Pakod yifkod. The word pakod is a very wonderful Hebrew word. It has many different meanings. It means to remember. It means to attend to. It means to appoint. It means a task. It means to be lost as well, in the sense of to be diminished. Pakod yifkod in the context here means God will surely remember you. And when he does, take my remains with you. So on that little pasuk, pakod yifkod, on that phrase, I mean, it's little because Ha-Turim talks about that particular phrase, pakod yifkod. And he says a beautiful drash, if I can find it. He says that I am on my deathbed. I've had, and I'm elaborating slightly, the subtext, I've had a tumultuous life, an eventful life. I don't need to review it here. His biography is very well known. And I've reached the end of my sojourn in this world. Anochi meis, says Ha-Turim, Anochi basar vadam, I am flesh and blood, I'm going to die. Today I'm alive, tomorrow I'm in the next world, or I'm in the underworld, I'm in the kever, I'm in the tomb. Aval HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but the Almighty, Melech El Chai V'Kayam, he lives forever. Hu yifkod eschem. So Yosef, who has been the protector of his brethren in Egypt. Okay, so he gave them some bit of grief along the way, as we know, but he's the one who ensured that his brothers and his father and their households would flourish in Egypt despite the famine. And now Yosef says, I'm going to die. I'm going I won't be here in the future, but Hashem will remember you. Hashem will redeem you. Hashem will not allow you to languish here forevermore. I'm going to stay in Egypt because I'm dying in Egypt. I'm asking, when you leave or your descendants leave, don't leave me behind. So that's the first thing he says. There's a sort of poignancy there. Anochi meis, that's the first part of the pasuk. I'm going to die, but Hashem lives forever and he will redeem you. But more fascinating is the expression pakod yifkod. It says the word yifkod can be also understood as a diminution, like the pasuk says, "V'lo nifkad mimenu ish." The soldiers or the officers said to Moshe, "We've done an inventory after the battle, and no one has been killed, no one has been lost, no one has been diminished. Our numbers are complete." Lo nifkad mimenu ish. So says Ha-Turim, pakod yifkod means that Hashem will diminish your tenure in Egypt by the gematria of the word pakod. Pakod is pei kuf vav. I'm sorry, pei kuf vav dalet. Actually, in the pasuk, if you've looked at it closely, you'll see it's spelled chaser without the vav. But the word pakod, if you spell it in full, it's pei kuf vav dalet. Pei is 80, kuf is 100, vav is 6, dalet is 4, so it's gematria 190. So he understands it to mean a remes to how long they actually stayed in Mitzrayim. According to the original prophecy, the original destiny, they were supposed to have been strangers in a foreign land for 400 years. But they got a discount. They got a discount of 190 years. So says Bal HaTurim, when Yosef said, Pakod Yifkod, there's a remez there, which perhaps Yosef had that in mind. Perhaps he did not even have it in mind, but it's in the Torah, and the Torah is hinting to the fact that pakod, that the gematria of pakod, which is 190, yifkod will be diminished, will be reduced from your sentence. The Jewish nation was sentenced to 400 years, but they had a reduction in their sentence by 190, and that's why they are ultimately in Mitzrayim, only redu, gematria 210, as we know. So on the Seder night, when we speak so much about how they were rushed out of Mitzrayim, how the people initially, perhaps they did believe and then they didn't believe, they were of little faith, we find in the Haggadah the kind of tension or almost the ambivalence about the Jewish people. Was the redemption really at hand? Moshe had to persuade them. He had to inspire them. He had to convince them. Part of that is because they were aware of the prophecy 400 years. They looked at their calendar and they saw, well, we haven't been here nearly that long. We're only here 210 years. Because they didn't realize that their sentence had been diminished. Now, how that happened, why it happened, we'll actually see a little bit. So this is the first comment that I wanted to share with you about pakod yifkod, according to the drash of the Bal HaTurim. I want to share with you a beautiful thought, which is not from Bal HaTurim, but it's consistent with his style. This is a very, I think, inspiring comment, an insight from the Vilna Gaon. It's attributed in different places with different versions to the Vilna Gaon. And I want to share with you three different, not so much versions, but three different components of the very, to say clever is probably to undersell it, but a brilliant insight, brilliant observation of the great Gaon Vilna. And this drash is, as I say, in the style or reminiscent of the approach of the Bal HaTurim. So the pasuk says, if we look at the beginning of Shmos, near the beginning of Shmos, so if you're with me in the art scroll, actually, if you just turn a couple of pages, we should find it, because the Torah says in pasuk Yud Daled on page 294. And this, of course, is in the Haggadah as well. In the Haggadah we say morar zu al shema al shuma. Why do we eat the morar? The Torah itself says you've got to eat morar. Nowadays, morar at the Seder night is a rabbinic obligation, because the Torah obligation was only in ancient times, only had the Korban Pesach. Then it was a mitzvah min haTorah. It says explicitly, "Amatzos umerorim yochluhu." Matzah, Pesach, matzah, and morah, to eat them together, as we say in the Haggadah as well. And nowadays, it still is a mitzvah, but it's a rabbinic mitzvah. And what is the basis for it? Very well known. We say in the Haggadah every year, twice a year, if you're in the Chutz La'aretz, "Vayemareru es chayehem ba'avodah kasha." So that is on page 294, pasuk Yud Dalet. So the Vilna Gaon makes a series of, as I said, brilliant observations. If you look closely at the words "Vayimareru es chayehem," now those who are very exacting in their Torah study might take note of the cantillation notes, as well as the words, as well as the vocalization or the vowelization, there are also cantillation notes. You can see in the word, if you look closely, Vayimararu, above the second resh, there is like an apostrophe. Vayimararu es chayehem, and there's a facing apostrophe, so to speak, in the next pasuk as chayehem, above the hey in the words chayehem. That's called, all of those notes, the cantillation notes, have names. There's a way to chant them, and there's a way to, and there's a name for them. Those those companion notes are called kadma ve'azla. Kadma ve'azla literally means to get up and go. Kadma is to do something with alacrity, kodem, to do it quickly or preemptively. Ve'azla means and to proceed. So kadma ve'azla means to preemptively go. Or you could say it means to get up and go. V'yamarus chayhem, and the way we chant it also is reminiscent of exactly that meaning. V'yamarus chayhem. It's a cantillation note which suggests action, which suggests maybe even dramatic action. V'yamarus chayhem. So says the Vilna Gaon that from here, the significance of those cantillation notes on those particular words is that because of the intensity of the labor, means they embittered their lives. A person can be an indentured servant, and maybe he doesn't enjoy freedom or he doesn't enjoy comfort, but he doesn't live a life of torture day by day. A person can even be a slave, although in our way of thinking, to be a slave is a very distasteful circumstance, and it's immoral and all of the rest of it. But in the ancient world, it was commonplace, and not every slave necessarily lived a life of hardship and of misery and of suffering. It might not have been the lap of luxury, I'm sure it was not. But v'yimarurus chayehem means that the servitude, the bondage, the slavery was intense. It was like sadistic. So says the Vilna Gaon, how is it that the Jewish people left Mitzrayim 190 years early? So one reason is because of the intensity of the servitude. If Hashem, so to speak, told Abraham that your descendants will be strangers in a foreign land, they'll be at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder for 400 years. So that's one sort of destiny, and not a very pleasant one. But the Jewish people suffered much more than that. They suffered attempted genocide. They suffered back-breaking labor from morning till night. And that's v'yimarus chayim. So says the Vilna Gaon that the intensity of the servitude meant that in 190 years they suffered enough in 210 years, they suffered enough for the full 400 years. So that's Kadma ve'azla. Why did they leave preemptively? They left so much earlier. It's because of v'yimarurus chayehem. That's the first thing he says. Then I saw quoted the name of the Vilna Gaon, a further idea. It's actually found in the writings of the Kerem HaTzvir, Tzvir Shfarber on Haggadah. He quotes the Vilna Gaon as saying a further observation. That same Kadma ve'azla, which is not entirely rare, it's a notable cantillation note, but it's not exceptionally rare. Nevertheless, it is interesting that it appears in our passage about the experience of the Jewish people in exile in Mitzrayim in particular. We find it later on. If you take a look at Perek Yud, so we've got to go forward to Perek Yud, Pasuk Yutes. Okay, it is, I suppose, quite a few chapters ahead. But once the dialogue between Moshe and Paro begins to unfold, plague after plague, so at a certain point, Paro expresses his willingness to allow the Jewish people to go to sacrifice in the desert for 3 days. And sorry, let me find it. Perek Yud, Pasuk Tes. Yeah. Paro says, who is going? I'll let you go. By the way, who is going? Mi v'mi ha'holchim. So, Vayushav and Pasuk Ches, Vayushav as Moshe, it's on page 340, if you're with me in the Art Scroll Stone Chumash. Well, Yesheves Moshe v'Aaron el Paro. Moshe and Aaron were brought back to Paro. Go and serve the Lord your God. Tell me who is going. I'm giving you permission, but I want to know who do you intend to take with you? That is to say, which portion, which proportion, which segment of the Hebrew slave population do you want me to release for this furlough? What do you mean? Who's going? We're all going. The young ones, the elderly ones. Now there, in those words, then it says, with our flock and our herd. But the Vilna Gaon draws attention to the words bivanenu vivnosin, with our sons and our daughters. There you see those cantillation notes, kadma v'azla, which, as I said, it's not entirely rare, but it is a notable cantillation note. It doesn't appear on every probably page of the Chumash. So he says bivanenu vivnoseinu, as a way of stressing who's going with our sons and our daughters. So says the Vilna Gaon, the way it's quoted by Kerem Hatzvi, there were two factors that caused or that precipitated or that enabled the Jewish people to be deserving of redemption before the 400 years. One was the intensity of the servitude. That's Vayimaru es Chayehem. That's one Kadma v'Azla, why they left early. The other reason they left early is because they had so many children, as according to the famous comment of Rashi, which is even hinted to in the pasuk itself, where it says that they increased and they multiplied and all of that. So because the Jewish women, the righteous women, were so successful in interesting their husbands in marital activity, so as a result, the women became pregnant, let's say, very regularly, and they gave birth to multiple children as well, which is also an act of righteousness to raise those children, etc. So the Jewish people, the population increased dramatically. So therefore, within 210 years, the Jewish population increased perhaps to the level that would have otherwise taken 400 years. So says the Vilna Gaon, and says according to the Kerem Hatzvi, the Kadma v'Azla, alluding to the preemptive departure of the Jewish people, is because of because of the intensity of the persecution, of the shibud, of the servitude, and because because of all of the sons and daughters got so many children. So in 210 years, the productivity of the growth of the Jewish people approximated or reached the threshold that would have otherwise or may have otherwise taken 400 years. But the most beautiful comment they say in the name of the Vilna Gaon, also I've got the sefer called the Chumash Hagra, which has a lot of citations from the name of the Vilna that he wrote and other things in his name. The most beautiful one is the observation that the words Kadma v'Azla have a gematria of 190. This is an amazing thing. Kadma v'Azla, those are the names of the cantillation notes. The cantillation notes are called Kadma v'Azla, of which the gematria of Kadma v'Azla is 190. You can work it out. You see that it really is so. And according to this, it's recorded in the name of the Vilna Gaon that Kadma v'Azla, that they got up and went early, preemptively, because of that was the 190 years. So the reasons why they left early we've mentioned, but how early did they leave? They left early by 190 years exactly, which is the gematria of Kadma v'Azla. They got up and left. So this is a comment that is, as I say, in the genre of the Baal Ha-Turim, although it comes, in fact, from the brilliant and genius sage of Vilna, Rabbi Eliyahu of Vilna, who died in 1797, if I remember correctly. One of the lengthy drushos, my drasha tonight is not going to be lengthy, but in the Haggadah, which has a lot of drashas, by which I mean there are psukim, there are verses, there are phrases, there are words which are interpreted. In fact, the main part of the Haggadah is built around the words of the farmer at the beginning of Parshas Ki Savo. Arami Oved Avi, Vair Mitzrayma, etc., that my father was a wandering Aramean and he went down to Egypt, and then they Egyptians oppressed us, and we called out to God and he redeemed us. So those 2 or 3 verses in the book of Devarim are the basis of the main part of the Haggadah. Your Haggadah extends over 50 pages, or maybe 150 pages, or maybe 500 pages in some cases, because Haggadah with a lot of commentaries, they can occupy a lot of space on your shelf. Especially if you have lots of them, you can fill a shelf with Haggadot without difficulty, and I've done that and more. My point is that the main part of the Haggadah is just an interpretation of those few psukim. Most of the drashot in the Haggadah are brief, but there's one which is extended, and that is the discussion between Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabbi Akiva, derech drash, how many plagues were the Egyptians afflicted with. So every school child knows 10 plagues. Everybody knows that. But in the drash realm, the rabbis discuss and they debate, maybe there are even more plagues. Maybe the Torah hints to the possibility of more plagues. In particular, maybe at the sea, when the crossing of the sea, which was the climactic event, it was the final nail in the coffin of the Egyptians and the final stage of the redemption of the Jewish people when they crossed the Yam Suf. So according to rabbinic interpretation, there were a whole series of plagues that afflicted the Egyptians then. Most of them are not identified exactly what they were, but you have the drashas. It's towards the latter part of the Magid section in Haggadah. If you have a Haggadah with you, which perhaps you do because this shir has been promoted as insights into the Haggadah inspiration. So you'll find it where you have those. I should say each one is a full short paragraph, but collectively this is an extended drash based on a pasuk in Tehillim about, so to speak, the various components. And it says in one place the finger of God, and it says the hand of God. So for the finger of God, they were afflicted with 10 plagues, and then the hand of God, they were afflicted with 50 plagues. Okay, I'm referring to that drash. Here's what the Baal Ha-Turim says about it. A really I think, beautiful drash. So Kamalaku, how many were they smitten with? So we have 50. Rabbi Yossi says it was 10 plus 50, 10 in Mitzrayim and 50 on the Yamsu, because it says Vayar Hashem Vayar Ha'amis Hayad Hagdolah, that in Mitzrayim it says the finger of God. So they were smitten with 10 plagues with the finger of God. When it says on the sea, the hand of God, as Hashem, so to speak, smote the Egyptian with his hand. So if a finger produces 10, so the hand is going to be a further 50. That's the view of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Eliezer says it was even more. It was 40 in Mitzrayim, because he quotes a certain pasuk, and on the Yam Suf there were 200. Rabbi Akiva says, you know what? Actually, there was even more than that. There was really 50 in Mitzrayim and 250 on the Yam Suf. So let's take a look at Perek Zayin, Pasuk Tes Zayin. So we'll find it here in Sefer Shmos on page 326, if you're with me in the Art Scroll Seder, and the following Pasuk as well. So here, Hashem says to Moshe that this is what you should tell Paro. V'amart elav Hashem Elokei shlachani elecha lemor shalach esami ve'avduni b'mimar. Send out my nation; they'll serve me in the wilderness. V'hinei lo shamata ad ko, and behold, you haven't yet listened. You haven't listened so far. So far, you haven't yet listened. Kamar Hashem, this is what Hashem says, Bezos Teda, with this you shall know, etc. So this is in the early stages of Moshe's remonstrating with Paro, you could say threatening him or intimidating him, because this is going to be the first of the 10 plagues. It's going to get much, much worse, as we know, stage by stage. But that's how it begins. Said the Baal Ha-Turim, take note of the last word in Pasuk Tes Zayin and the first word in Pasuk Yud Zayin. Both words are ko. V'nei lo shamata ad ko amar Hashem. So says Baal Ha-Turim, lo shamata ad ko, you haven't listened until now. V'lo shamata ad ko. So says the Baal Ha-Turim, there's a remes here. Hashem is saying to Moshe, or maybe Moshe is saying to Paro, I know that you're not going to listen until the word ko. The word ko amar Hashem kechatzos halayla. It refers, according to the Drash of Baal HaTurim, Moshe is alluding to the fact that he will eventually say to Paro, Ko Amar Hashem kechatzos halayla. This is what God says. Around midnight will be the climactic plague of the firstborn. So the first drash that the Baal HaTurim says here is Lo shene lo shamata ad ko. You will not listen until I say the word ko in that pasuk. Ko amar Hashem kachatzos halayla. So I'm giving you the chance to listen now, but I already know because Hashem has told me, actually, one way and another, you will remain obstinate until the end, until the final climactic 10th plague. But then Baal HaTurim says something further as well. It's interesting that the last word is ko, and the next word in the following pasuk is also ko. You know, in the Chumash, we have no distinction between one verse and the next verse. There's no gap, only just the same gap as you have between one word and another word and another word. So in the Sefer Torah, you have the words ko, ko right next to one another. So says the Baal HaTurim, the word ko has gematria 25, but in atbash, now atbash, you remember, is the method by which we assign every letter in the alphabet has a companion letter at the other end of the alphabet. So Aleph corresponds to Taf. It's called At-Bash. The base corresponds to Shin, and its Gimel corresponds to Resh. At-Bash, Gar, Dak. Every letter of the first 11 letters has a companion, as an interchangeable with the corresponding letter at the end of the alphabet. So says the Baal HaTurim, it's interesting that ko in gematria, ko in atbash is lamed tzadi. The kaf corresponds to the lamed. Kaf is the 11th letter of the alphabet. Lamed is the 13th letter. The 12th letter. So the Hebrew alphabet has 22 letters. So the first 11 correspond to the last 11, but in which the first corresponds with the other, etc. Anyway, if you work it out, you see that ko, the atbash, is lamed tzadi. Lamed tzadi is gematria 120. So says the Baal HaTurim, a beautiful drash. Ko, ko. The words ko are juxtaposed to one another. So ko, chafhei, in atbash is like lamed tzadi, which is 120. Lamed is 30, tzadi is 90. 120 times 2 is 240. He says the Baal HaTurim, you won't listen until you have been stricken or smitten with the full allocation, the full panoply of plagues, which according to the drash of Rebbe Eliezer is 240. Lo shamata ad ko, you won't listen until the ko, until the gemat, until the atbash of that, which is 240. And he says the Baal HaTurim, and this is hinted to in the pasuk, let's take upesi ya'arim. A pasuk in Mishlei, because lamed tzadi is not only two letters which have a gematria of 120, it also has a meaning. A leitz is a scoffer or a mocker. The pasuk says, let's take. If you beat the scoffer, then the one who maybe is not that clever, he's not that shrewd, he's not that world wise, but by observing what happens to the scoffer who gets clobbered, he wises up. That's the pasuk. Let's take upesi yarim. The scoffer, perhaps he's irredeemable, but the onlookers will learn a lesson from that. Let's take upesi yarim. So says the Baal HaTurim, it's as if the Paro was the let's. Paro would never get the message. He would never learn until 240 plagues. According to the Medrash, actually, he finally did get the message after the 240 plagues, and maybe he did tshuva. But according to the simple understanding, he perished, but it was only after the full 240 plagues, according to this drash, which is hinted to in the words ko, ko. There's more to it actually, because ko we said is the in the atbash is equal to 120, 120. But the letters chaf hey and chaf hey are 25. So ko is 25 times 2 is 50. So this is a remez to Rabbi Yossi's view that altogether there were 50 plagues, 10 in Egypt and 40 on the sea. And if you look in your Haggadah, you'll see that the view of Rabbi Akiva is that there were 50 plus 200. So there again, you've got the words ko are allude to the 50. So, and which according to, as I said, according to Rabbi Yossi, there were 50 plagues altogether. According to Rabbi Akiva, there were 50 plagues in Mitzrayim altogether, and another 200 on the Yam Suf. So this is, I think, a very clever drash, drawing attention to the fact that the two words ko happen to appear one right next to the other. I just wanted to add on that in my thinking, there may be another remez here as well, because one of the very well-known aspects of the Haggadah is the four sons, of whom one of them is the Ben Rasha, the wicked son, and he asks a kind of scoffing, a mocking question, and the answer that he gets is a very sharp answer, to the point that it says, Afata hakeyes shinav, blunt his teeth. So the wicked son is characterized as the mocker, the one who is mocking. He says, what's this labor to you? Why do you bother with it even? So Afata hakeyes shinav, and say, if you had been there, you would not have been redeemed. It's a very almost it's not supposed to dismissive, it's more than dismissive, it's in a kind of aggressive answer. So this is the let's, this is the lo shamata article, the let's will never listen. So therefore we say, if you had been there, you would not have been redeemed. Out you go. Of course, it's interesting, the Ben Rasha, the wicked son, does come to the Seder, and much has been said about that. Our time really is up, but I have one last, very short, and again, I say a beautiful thought from Baal Ha-Turim. At the very end of the Seder, or depending on how late you want to include, how many songs at the end of the Haggadah you want to include in that reckoning, but certainly one of the last of the songs that we sing, besides the ones at the very end, Chad Gadya, that sort of thing, which really have no direct connection to Pesach. Of course, they do indirectly, but one could really sing those songs appropriately any day or night of the year. But there is one of those piyutim which is clearly directly related to Pesach. It's a piyut, and we add it on at the end of the Haggadah, the end of the Seder, and that's Vayi B'Chatzi Halayla, and it was at midnight, Vayi B'Chatzi Halayla. And the Paitan reviews in a very beautiful, lyrical, rhyming fashion a whole series of important events, according to Chazal, and in some cases explicit in the Torah, took place at midnight, of which the most pertinent one, of course, for Haggadah, for Seder, is the death of the firstborn, and that's explicit in Torah, Vayi B'Chatzi Halayla. So says the Baal Ha-Turim, if you take a look at Pasuk, Perek Yud Beis, Pasuk Mem Beis, so that is chapter 12, verse 42. And we can find that in the Art Scroll Chumash on page 358. Leil shimurim hu Lashem lahotzi'ah me'eretz Mitzrayim hu halayla hazeh Lashem shimurim l'chol bnei Yisrael l'dorosam. I'll read the English. It is a night of anticipation for Hashem to take them out of the land of Egypt. This was the night for Hashem, a protection for all the children of Israel for their generations. Okay. The interesting thing is that the word shimurim appears twice in this pasuk. And my friends, it's the only place in the entire Tanakh where the word shimurim appears. The word shimurim appears nowhere else in the entire Hebrew scriptures except twice in this verse. And interestingly, according to the Art Scroll people, it has two different meanings. The first time it says it is a night of anticipation, and then later on, the Art Scroll people render it a protection for all the children of Israel. I think this is according to Rashi. Actually, Rashi explains it that way as well. Says the Baal Ha-Turim, a beautiful drash. Le'er shimurim, le'er shimurim. This night, which refers to Chatzi Halayla, this night was divided into two. The first half of that night was when Hashem anticipated the redemption of the Jewish people. At the stroke of midnight, the firstborn died. At the stroke of midnight, Paro was overwhelmed finally by the futility of his position, and he ran out into the streets to seek Moshe and Aaron and urge them, plead with them, insist that they leave. At the stroke of midnight, Hashem was anticipating that. For how long? Maybe from the beginning of time, maybe from the time of Avraham Avinu, maybe from the time that he told Moshe Rabbeinu, maybe from the time that the plagues began. Probably all of that. Hashem was anticipating at that moment. That's Leil Shimurim Hu Lashem. Says about Ha-Turim, that's the first half of the night. The second half of the night is kept, is shamur, is protected, is guarded, is preserved for the future redemption. The future redemption perhaps will also happen at night. It will certainly happen at night in the metaphorical sense, in the sense of exile that will give way to redemption. That's shimurim hu halayla hazel Hashem shimurim lechol bnei Israel. The second half is the shimurim for the Jewish people. And I would like to suggest the first one is when Hashem anticipated. The Jewish people didn't anticipate it. It came as a surprise to them. Even after all of the plagues, it still came as a surprise. They couldn't believe it. And even once they left, they wanted to go back to Egypt because the slave mentality had been so deeply inculcated within them. And maybe, as I said earlier, they had this tradition of 400 years. They didn't understand, or they didn't believe. They didn't have the self-belief that they would be redeemed earlier. So the first half of the night, when the Jewish people were redeemed from Mitzrayim, only Hashem anticipated it. My friends, the second half of the night, the future redemption, we all anticipate it. This is for Bnei Israel. The yearning and the awaiting and the anticipation for Bnei Israel has been 2,000 years in the making. So the second half of the night, the second half, which is preserved for Bnei Israel, for the future redemption, says about Ha-Turim, this refers to that aspect of the redemption, the future redemption, which we all anticipate. It may be bimhera v'yameinu. Amen. Thank you to everyone. I'm sorry we ran over by about 10 minutes, but Pesach only comes once a year, and this is our pre-Pesach Seder inspiration from the Baal Ha-Turim. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I wish everyone a wonderful Chag Kasher v'Sameach. If you're going to be with us at Kesher this Shabbos, we have the Shabbos Hagadol Drasha on the subject of gluten-free Pesach, the rise of oat matzah. So please join us for that, and we will look forward to seeing you. We also have Carlbach Kabbalat Shabbat Friday night as well. So there's a lot happening, and we look forward to seeing you. B'ezrat Hashem, Chag Kasher v'Sameach to one and all.